Thank you, Mr. President. I ask you to consent to dispense with the quorum.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is becoming a regular appearance on the Senate floor to talk about Social Security, and it's something that most Americans think that Congress supports almost unanimously. It's a program that's been with us. President Roosevelt on August 14th, 1935, signed the Social Security Act. Out of that came Medicare, when a Democratic Congress in 1965, with President Johnson's signature, signed it. We know what Medicare means. We know what Social Security means for people to live longer, healthier lives, no matter your income, no matter if you've been a senator for 20 years, no matter if you're a CEO, no matter if you're a UAW member in a Ford plant in Avon, no matter if you're a low-income worker at the Hilton Hotel on West Market in Akron, no matter your work, that you are eligible at a certain age for Social Security and Medicare. So what's the debate about? Well, the debate is philosophical, and I'm not even sure what. It's partly my conservative colleagues who generally want to privatize Medicare and Social Security. For them, it seems to be something philosophic or ideological, or sometimes it's just people wanting to support the insurance industry. Because if you privatize Medicare and Social Security, yeah, it'll help the insurance companies. Yeah, it'll help the banks. If you privatize the VA, like many want to do, Veterans Administration, undermining what veterans have earned by serving their country, it may help some private sector corporations. It'll help pad their bottom line. It will help many CEOs make even more money, but it's wrong because, Mr. President, when work has dignity, people have a secure retirement. Veterans have benefits, pensions are protected, Americans can count on Medicare and count on Social Security. A secure retirement shouldn't be a partisan issue. It wasn't a partisan issue particularly in the 1930s. It's not a partisan issue to the American people. I don't think you can tell a Republican from a Democrat who's 70 years old or 80 years old drawing Social Security and Medicare. They know they've earned it. They paid into it for decades, and as I said, they've earned it. It's one of the most unifying institutions in the country. Americans want to protect Social Security and Medicare. They want to make those programs stronger. Americans do, but elected officials, far too many people on this side of the aisle, as the senator from Connecticut knows, far too many people from this side of the aisle think that we should privatize those programs. They'll be more efficient, or some such philosophical jargon that they throw forward. But we know what will happen is insurance companies will make more money, banks will make more money, and people who have worked in this country and played by the rules all their lives get squeezed. They're threatening. So today, down the hall, especially, Mr. President, straight down the hall in the House of Representatives down there, the Republicans are threatening to raise the debt limit. In order to raise the debt limit, the debt limit is simply we should pay our bills. We've run, the Trump administration and all administrations have run this deficit up. We should pay the bills. That's what it's about. They're refusing to pay the bills our nation owes, and they're saying that if we don't do what they want to do, then they're going to stop Social Security checks from going out. They're going to try to privatize Social Security. They want to take this country and the American economy to the brink of default. They want to leverage their fiscal lunacy. It really is leveraging their fiscal lunacy, frankly, to cut your Social Security. It's that simple. Then, as I said, there's privatizing Social Security. The details differ. The terms may change, but the goal's the same. And I've been in the Senate now. This is my beginning of my last part of my third term. This is my 17th year. And every couple of years, few of the wunderkinds on that side of the aisle want to try to find a way to privatize Social Security, privatize Medicare, and privatize the Veterans Administration. It's nothing less than an attempt to go back on a bedrock promise. The senator from Nevada understands that people pay into Social Security every paycheck. They pay into Medicare every pay. Well, that's not actually true. If you're really, really, really rich, you only pay into Social Security for the first part of the year because you've already paid enough for the year, and some philosophy that I don't really understand. But it's a bedrock promise to all of us. You pay in for all of us. You pay in, you get those benefits. Last year, I introduced a resolution. Senator from Nevada co-sponsored it, affirming the Senate's commitment to protecting and expanding Social Security. It was pretty simple. It simply said, we affirm We pledge we will protect Social Security and Medicare from any kinds of cuts from the far right that doesn't believe in the program. Almost every Democrat signed on, not one Republican signed on, not one Republican committed to our promise, recommitted to our promise to the American people. If you work hard all your life, Social Security will be there for you. So Americans shouldn't have to worry that politicians secure with their government pensions are going to try to take away their retirement. I urge my colleagues to do what the American people want us to do overwhelmingly. They want us to protect and expand Social Security and Medicare. And as I said, Madam President, just look down the hall in the House of Representatives. There's a new majority there, a new majority controlled by the far right of what used to be a pretty centrist Republican Party from the far right that whenever they try to privatize Social Security and Medicare, they get all kinds of contributions from the right wing and from Wall Street and from some big healthcare companies and some big energy companies and all that. And it's wrong. We know it's wrong. We know whether it's Nevada, whether it's Las Vegas or Cleveland, whether it's Reno or Columbus, whether it's Carson City or Dayton, we know that overwhelmingly people in this country want a strong Social Security that will always be there for our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids. They want a Medicare that will provide health care to people regardless of your wealth, regardless of your income, regardless of your station in life. That's my pledge. I know the senators that are on the floor from Connecticut and Nevada also support that commitment and pledge. It's where we are as a country. It's not, unfortunately, where so many of my colleagues sit. Madam President, I yield the floor. Madam President, I thank you, Senator Rubio, for your comments. So whenever I hear my colleagues rail against China, and I agree with that 95% of the time, whenever I hear them say things like we want that they want to be the world's most powerful country, the most powerful government, I agree with that. But as Senator Rubio said, this isn't a debate between him and me. I just want to make a couple of comments. I want to talk about worker safety in a moment that I know the presiding officer cares so much about. I go back a half a generation, and Senator Rubio wasn't here then, but many of his ideological soulmates were here then. And this Congress couldn't stop itself from Presidents Clinton and Bush 1 and Obama and Bush 2 and Trump couldn't help themselves from giving all kinds of breaks to American corporations, incentives to American corporations to go to China, to move to China. So they shut down production in Duluth, Minnesota. They shut down production in Mansfield, Ohio, my hometown, or Toledo and Youngstown, as corporations were lobbying Congress. I teamed up with Lindsey Graham, a Republican, against that. We were unsuccessful. His corporations lobbied Congress to give China something called permanent normal trade relations. So they shut down production in Ohio. They moved that production to China. And what happened? They taught China a whole lot about manufacturing, and they created a whole lot of wealth in China. And now we're surprised about TikTok. We're surprised that the Chinese military is as powerful as it is. I just think it's important that we remember when we listen to corporate interests in this body who lobby here to weaken, to push jobs overseas, these are the kinds of things that happen. And I hope we learn from that, and I hope we take that lesson and apply it to TikTok and into the future. So, Senator Rubio, thank you for raising the issue. Madam President, I want to talk about worker safety for a moment. On Friday, 7 American workers went to work in West Reading, Pennsylvania at the RM Chocolate Factory to provide for their families. I spoke to Senator Casey about this, who's one of the leaders, represents the senior senator from Pennsylvania, who's one of the leaders in fighting for worker safety in this body. I spoke with him about it a few minutes ago. Those 7 workers never came home after an explosion leveled the plant. Our thoughts are with their families who lost sons and daughters, workers who were paid decent wages, not exorbitant wages, decent wages, and never return home to their families. We'll learn more about what went wrong. I know that Pennsylvania workers will always have an ally in Senators Casey and Fetterman on this issue and so much more. This struck me in a more emphatic way because it was I believe it was one day before the 112th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. That tragedy woke up the nation to the dangers that workers faced in the jobs. Dozens of workers, because the management had locked the factory doors because they were afraid some of these very low-paid, mostly women, some of them very young workers, might steal a blouse or two. They locked the factory doors. So when this fire broke out in a very flammable environment, workers jumped out the window to their deaths, dozens and dozens of workers. That made a huge difference in Congress finally dealing with worker safety. In fact, a woman who was nearby, heard the sirens, came to the scene, was named Frances Perkins. This was in 1911. She became the first female Secretary of Labor under President Roosevelt, stayed with him his entire 12-plus years in office, played a big role with Senator Wagner of writing the most pro-worker legislation in the nation's history, especially on worker safety. Now, Madam President, I wear this pin on my lapel. I've worn it since it was given to me 25 years ago at a Workers' Memorial Day rally by the steelworkers. It's a depiction of a canary in a birdcage. The mine workers, 120 years ago, used to take a canary down in the mine. If the canary died from toxic gas or lack of oxygen, the mine worker got out of the mines. He had no union in those days strong enough to protect him. He had no government in those days that cared enough to protect him. We changed that because of worker safety laws. We changed that because of unions. This tragedy in West Reading, Pennsylvania, reminds us that our work to protect workers and make workplaces safer never ends. I think about the steel workers who lost their lives near Toledo in an explosion in a refinery in Oregon, Ohio last year. Max Morrissey and Ben Morrissey, they were brothers, died in that accident. I think about the Norfolk Southern worker Norfolk Southern, because of its culture of laying off workers and compromising safety and paying big compensation bonuses to executives. A worker at Norfolk Southern lost his life earlier this month. No worker should have to work about returning, kissing her husband goodbye, kiss his wife goodbye, kiss his children or her children goodbye. Shouldn't have to worry about returning home. That's why we should stand up to corporate lobbies who always want to cut costs, worker safety. Be damned, we know what happened. We saw in East Palestine what happened because the railroad laid off a third of its workers, and then they compromised on safety. We saw what happened in Silicon Valley Bank when they didn't pay attention to consumers and regulators and the public interest. And again, workers always pay the price. We know what will happen. Every time there's an industrial accident, people are upset, they worry about it, but the companies continue to lobby regulators for weaker laws. We see it here with corporate lobbyists. We see it in the regulatory agencies when they always want to weaken consumer laws. They always want to weaken environmental laws. They always want to weaken worker safety laws. And communities always pay, and workers always pay. It's why a union card is so powerful. It means higher wages, it means better benefits, it means safer workplace. If you love this country, you fight for the people who make it work, whether they punch a clock or swipe a badge, whether they work at tips, whether they work for tips, or whether they work on salary. You fight to keep people safe in the job. That is our job here, to make sure we do that better than we have in the past. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask to dispense with the quorum.
Without objection.
Thank you. I rise in support of the CRA that we will be voting on soon. This vote presents a pretty simple choice. Do you stand with American manufacturers and American workers, or do you stand with China, and do you stand with our continuing to lose our industrial base? I fought my whole career for fair trade. One of my first and proudest votes was against the North American Free Trade Agreement as a member of the House. We saw what that agreement did to Vermont, did to Ohio, did to Kansas, where Senator Moran just spoke. We saw what NAFTA did. These trade fights, it's not a new fight. Some years ago, about 20 years ago when I was a member of the House, I wrote a book called The Myths of Free Trade. The book wasn't exactly a bestseller, I can live with that. But telling the truth on trade has not been popular in this town. The presidents of both parties, majorities in Congress, corporate leaders, CEOs were lobbying Congress. Essentially, Mr. President, these trade agreements sold out American workers. These trade agreements signed or at least negotiated by American presidents, voted for by far too many members of Congress, lobbied by the most powerful interest group in Washington. I remember during NAFTA, I remember two things during NAFTA particularly. One was someone said there were more corporate jets at National Airport than they had ever seen because CEOs were all flying in to push for NAFTA, to get us to vote for NAFTA because it was more money in their pockets because it was fewer dollars in workers' pockets. The other thing I remember, Mr. President, was this is a two-party thing. The Democrats were pretty bad, Republicans were actually slightly worse, but both parties were guilty, and presidents of both parties, from Trump all the way back to Clinton since I came. But one of the Democratic leaders on this issue in the House said to me, I hate these congressional recesses because when our members go home and go to county fairs or start meeting with people, they decide they don't think NAFTA is such a great idea. So every time we went home, this guy who was a member of Congress who was pushing for NAFTA had more work to do because the more the public heard from workers, the more that congressmen heard from workers and from the public, the less they liked this agreement. Workers in Ohio and around the country have watched the people who are supposed to represent them stand up for them to sell out to corporations again and again. So let me tell you a real quick story. I grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, an industrial city at the time, roughly halfway between Cleveland and Columbus. I worked on a family farm nearby through most of my teen years. But I remember walking the halls at a school called Johnny Appleseed Junior High. In Johnny Appleseed Junior High, I walked the halls with the sons and daughters of electrical workers at Westinghouse, of auto workers at General Motors, at rubber workers from Mansfield Tire, at machinists from Tap and Stove, and with the sons and daughters of tradespeople, laborers, electricians, insulators, sheet metal workers, plumbers, pipe fitters, carpenters, operating engineers. And those kids had a chance in life. Those kids had a pretty good, solid, middle-class life because their parents carried a union card. They had that advantage. And we were a country that management would sit down with workers and they would negotiate. Management would do well, not the kind of $10 million a year CEO salaries today, but they would do well, but workers would do well and would be able to buy a car and a decent home and send their kids to Mansfield OSU or North Central Technical College or whatever. But by the time I got to Mansfield High School, you could see those jobs starting to be lost. By the time, years later, when I represented Mansfield in the legislature, so many of those jobs were gone because those companies, using words like first they moved south to cheap labor, then they moved to Mexico, then they moved to China. Those companies were moving their production overseas in the name of, quote, efficiency. Efficiency, Mr. President, is always business school speak for lower wages. We want more efficiency. Well, actually, we really want lower wages, but we can't say that publicly. Corporations search the globe for cheap labor. Again, first they shut down production in Mansfield, Ohio, and Toledo, and Dayton, and then they moved to Alabama or Mississippi. And the wages were low, and the unions were not particularly active there because the governments in those states kept them out and the business kept them out. But then those wages weren't cheap enough, so that's when they started going overseas. They lobbied for tax breaks and bad trade deals, always in search of lower wages. And Wall Street rewarded them over and over. When a company like Norfolk Southern, I've paid a lot of attention to because of their irresponsibility and greed and what they did to a community in my state. Every time they lay off workers, Norfolk Southern's laid off a third of its workforce in the last 10 years. Every time they lay off workers, their quarterly earnings report gets a little better and their profits get a little better. What's Wall Street do? Wall Street rewards them with a higher stock price. And then what happens, Mr. President? Then those CEOs and the top executives are able to cash in a bigger and bigger way with stock buybacks and other ways. So look where we've ended up because of this corporate-dominated, corporate-written trade policy. An Ohioan invented the light bulb. Today, 99% of LED bulbs are made in China. American invented the other on the West Coast, invented the semiconductor. 90% of them are made overseas. We cannot and will not make that mistake again with the technologies that power our economy over the next century. We've heard a lot of talk in the Senate over the past year about supporting manufacturing innovation so we can better compete with China. Senator Cornyn's on the floor. He and Senator Casey are working on a really important bill on corporate outsourcing that I hope we pass, and it will absolutely matter. it's why, in the end, it's why we passed the CHIPS Act, to bring semiconductor production back home where it belongs. We passed a bipartisan infrastructure bill. I work with Senator Portman, the other senator in Ohio, on that and a number of other bills that rebuild our bridges and roads. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act to make sure we lead the world in new and renewable energy technologies like solar, but now suspending those solar tariffs is antithetical to the good work we did. So we take like 4 steps forward, and then today we're going to move 3 steps backward. That's not the kind of progress we need. President Biden has talked about how we are essentially, and I've been talking to him about this, and he has been repeating it, that we are burying the term Rust Belt in my part of the country. So you can't say you want American manufacturing to lead the world and then allow Chinese companies, subsidized always by their government, to skirt the rules and dump solar panels into the U.S. We have in my state, I believe it's still the largest solar manufacturing company in America. First Solar employs 2,000 workers in Northwest Ohio. These workers are ready to lead the world in this industry. They just need a level playing field. We know China cheats. The Chinese government, as they have for a generation. Unfortunately, American politicians help them do it, and American corporations help them do it, and we build up the Chinese military that now we're concerned with. But China illegally subsidizes industry from steel to solar. They've been doing it for years. They're always coming up with new ways to cheat. It's sort of a whack-a-mole problem where we stop this cheating and then it goes on somewhere else, and we stop that and it goes on somewhere else. We put tariffs on their illegally dumped products, so they move some aspect of production to other nearby countries to get around those rules. They move to Cambodia and Malaysia and Thailand and Vietnam, and wherever they can find to cheat and to ignore the rules. And you know, blame them, and I certainly do, but we've allowed it. We've allowed it because American politicians, presidents of both parties, far too many people in this chamber, I would certainly say the presiding officer is an exception to that. Far too many people in this body have gone along with it as corporate America has lobbied and lobbied and lobbied aggressively. This isn't just a guess. The administration's own Commerce Department conducted an independent investigation. They released the preliminary results in December. Surprise, surprise, they found that yes, 4 leading Chinese solar cell manufacturers are dodging U.S. tariffs by routing some of their operations through Southeast Asia. We can't let them keep doing it. That's what this vote today is about. It has real consequences for our leadership in my state in manufacturing and American leadership in one of the leading energy industries of our future. To my colleagues who say that we must allow these Chinese imports for the time being in order to fight climate change, I disagree. Nobody in this body is more concerned and more active in terms of understanding environmental issues. As a senior in high school, I started the first Earth Day in Richland County in 1970, and my commitment is absolute, but we can't. People say this is about climate change. Surely it isn't. It's about ceding our leadership to other countries, and it will not result in long-term success. American workers must know we have their backs. They need to know they aren't a little side issue. We're for workers except when we're doing this, or we're for workers except for doing that. If you believe in the dignity of work, if you put workers at the center of our economic policy, it makes things better. We've seen how dangerous it is when we cede American leadership to other countries in key industries, like semiconductors. Now we play catch-up. American workers have proven they can make these solar panels. It's not a hypothetical. Americans are manufacturing solar panels that can power our economy right now, today. They just need a level playing field. How are businesses going to expand and scale up production if they're constantly dealing with a flood? And I mean a flood, one after another wave of illegally subsidized imports. It comes down, Mr. President, as you know, to whose side are you on? Do you stand with workers in Ohio, or do you stand with the Chinese Communist Party? Do you stand with the American solar industry, or do you stand with the solar industry in a country that cheats time after time? It's that simple. If you love this country, you fight for the people who make it work. I ask my colleagues to join me in standing up with workers in Ohio and around the country. Mr. President, I ask to put the following remarks in a different place in the congressional record.
Without objection.
I rise today to recognize and honor a longtime member of my staff, Anna Gokaldis. Anna's been with our office for almost a decade, working on veterans affairs, foreign policy, defense, making a difference for so many Ohioans, so many of our veterans. Anna's last day with our office is a couple days from now. She moves on for a new opportunity at Millennium Challenge. Well, she'll be working on something she cares so passionately about to reduce poverty around the world. They're lucky to have her. Her dedication to public service and the public good is unwavering. One of her greatest successes happened last summer when we passed the PACT Act. It's the most comprehensive expansion of benefits for veterans who have faced toxic exposure in our country's history. Because of Anna and the veterans and the advocates that she worked with, the PACT Act is law today, named after an Ohioan, Heath Robinson. Thousands of veterans have access to the health care they deserve. And because of her work, and because this place did this right, this bill passed in August. I remember the president signing it. By January, several hundred thousand veterans, tens of thousands in my state of Ohio, were already getting additional care from the VA because they had one of these 23 illnesses that exposure to these football field-sized burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan especially. That exposure can cause any of these 23 illnesses. If you are diagnosed with one of those illnesses, you will immediately get care at the Dayton VA or Cleveland or Cincinnati or Chillicothe or the Columbus or Mansfield CBOC. It's one example of why Anna's so effective. Veterans brought this issue to her and my staff. She made sure they felt seen and heard. She took their concerns seriously. She approached every conversation with care. She went to work. We worked with members of both parties to find a solution, especially Senator Tester and Senator Moran. Anna never gave up. We got it done among staff. Anna's known for her problem-solving skills and her ability to connect with Ohio veterans. When VA recommended closing the Chillicothe VA, Anna fought to ensure it stay open so veterans in southern Ohio could continue to receive care. Anna helped plan roundtables coordinated with VA. She got me to spend a lot of time in Chillicothe talking to Jessica Fee, the head of the union there, and others. Together we got it done. Every year, Anna guided through our office through the NDAA process, the bill that funds national defense, special attention to military bases in Mansfield and Youngstown and Toledo and Springfield, and special attention to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton. She's long fought for better mental health services, suicide prevention. She's made veterans issues an area often overlooked, a priority for the Senate. And one of the reasons, Mr. President, that I sit on the Veterans Committee and the Ag Committee, those two committees really are the least partisan committees in the Senate. You can always, I reach across the aisle, always in those two committees, with Senator Thune on agriculture issues, with Senator Tillis on veterans issues and others, and we get things done, and how important that is. On the foreign policy side, Anna always stood up for human rights and democracy and justice around the world. She fought for global health, leading our office's efforts on tuberculosis, which still kills more than 1 million people a year around the world. We know how to deal with it. We've made progress, not yet enough. Anna's legacy with our office extends far past countless legislative wins, making all of this work better. She's pushed every member of our staff to do their best work for the people whom we serve. Her determination and dedication and commitment to public service has made a difference for so many. On behalf of everyone in my office and the committees, and all those who've had the honor of working alongside Anna Gokaldis, we'll miss you, and we thank you for your service. Thank you, Mr. President. Not speak nearly that long, but I know we are about to vote on the Congressional Review Act on an issue that I happen to disagree with the president on. My whole career has been standing up for workers. My whole career has been standing up for sometimes to presidents of both parties, and I think if you look at the history of trade in this country and what we've done, we've seen, frankly, that this body, that down the hall in the House of Representatives and in the White House have historically not stood up for workers. I grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, in a small industrial city, about 50,000 people. It was a very industrial city, less so now, but I went to Johnny Appleseed Junior High School, and I remember walking the halls with the sons and daughters of machinists who worked at Tappan Stove, and rubber workers that worked for Mansfield Tire, and steel workers at Empire Reeves, I believe was the company's name then, auto workers who worked at General Motors, a number of electrical workers at Westinghouse, and, Madam President, also the sons and daughters of people in the trades, electricians and carpenters, insulators and pipe fitters, plumbers and operating engineers and laborers, people highly skilled who build America. And as companies, as corporations, throughout particularly in my part of the country, but in Nevada everywhere, corporations began to shut down plants in the industrial Midwest. They moved those plants to low-wage areas, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, North and South Carolina especially. And because those wages weren't quite low enough to satisfy the greed, I think there's no other word, the greed of corporate America, then those same companies began to lobby Congress. And one of my first votes as a member of Congress many years ago was in opposition to the North American Free Trade Agreement. And those of us who opposed NAFTA predicted with almost certainty what was inevitably going to happen. Once you pass a trade agreement giving these companies the opportunity to go to Mexico and then to China with no tariffs, going for very low wages, to exploit workers in those countries, which is what they did, you begin to see plants shut down. And Madam President, we know what happened. We know that far too many of our colleagues in the House and Senate were willing to pass these trade agreements like NAFTA. We also know that down the hall, the House of Representatives did the same thing, the Senate did it, and frankly, we had presidents of both parties who sold out American workers. And the lobbyists were here pushing for NAFTA, pushing later for PNTR with China, weakening the rules there so that these companies, they were up and gone. They left Ohio, they left Indiana, they left Illinois, they left so much of the industrial Midwest. And because this Congress and presidents of both parties, from Trump all the way back to Clinton, I would include Obama and Bush, both Bushes, and Clinton and Trump, that they were willing to sell out American workers to the lobbyists who pushed for these trade agreements that they could seek cheaper wages in China. And another thing that happened with China, Madam President, was that what we did when we moved all these jobs to China was we built up the Chinese military because we provided the technology and the wealth to the Chinese Communist Party, who then were able to build up a high-tech military, not quite rivaling ours, but certainly dangerous enough that we paid attention. My vote against NAFTA was one of my proudest votes, and my vote against PNTR with China, most favored nation status for China. So we're seeing what that has yielded. In the end, it's a simple choice. Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the Chinese Communist Party or the side of American workers? And that, to me, what this vote is about today, the Congressional Review Act about solar tariffs. I would add, full disclosure, one of the biggest solar manufacturers, I believe still the biggest single solar manufacturing plant in America, is near Toledo, just south of Toledo in northwest Ohio. Those workers will benefit if we vote yes and then override the president's veto. It's what I urge my colleagues to do today, to pass this simple resolution, to continue these tariffs on China, because as long as they keep cheating, as long as American companies are willing to take the products from slave labor and underpaid labor and exploited labor and bring them into this country, these problems will continue for our industrial base. I heard the President of the United States down the hall at the I believe his last State of the Union, saying the term Rust Belt. We are burying the term Rust Belt. I have talked to the President about burying that term. He mentioned it that day on the State of the Union that evening, and mostly we're starting to in this country. We're seeing a reindustrialization of America. We're seeing chips now. Chips were invented in the United States. 90% of them were made mostly in Taiwan and China. The light bulb was invented by an Ohioan, Thomas Edison, he grew up not far from where I grew up. Now 100% of LEDs are made overseas. So if we're going to reindustrialize this country, bring these jobs back, that's what the CHIPS legislation is all about. That's what we are doing with Intel in Columbus. This sets us back. This president's veto of this bill sets us back a couple more years in redeveloping, bringing these jobs back. doing the kind of insourcing that Senator Casey and others have fought for here. So I'll wrap up asking my colleagues to vote yes on this Congressional Review Act on solar tariffs, because again, it's whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the Chinese Communist Party or on the side of American workers? To me, it's as clear as day which side to be on. Thank you, Madam President. Who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their communities and to our state and to our country. This year we'll add the names of five Ohioans to the National Law Enforcement Memorial, all who laid their lives down last year. Deputy Sheriff Daniel Kinn, Deputy Sheriff Matthew Eugene Yates, Police Officer Dominic Francis, Agent John Dale Stayrook, Deputy Sheriff Terrence Nicholas Bateman. Sadly, we already know of one more name that will be added to the memorial next year, Officer Timothy James Unwin, III of the Springfield Township Police Department. Each one of these losses is a tragedy for a family, for a community, for their fellow officers. These Ohioans' lives are a reminder of the ideals we should strive for. We need officers who are true public servants in the best sense of the words, people who give themselves to their communities. And these Ohioans gave so much. In their memory, I want to reminisce for a moment about each of them and tell my colleagues why this is so important and who these public servants were. Deputy Sheriff Daniel J. Kinn was a devoted husband and father to 2 young children. He was known for his easygoing personality and being a colleague and friend that everyone could count on. He was a Sandusky native, a community on Lake Erie, and helped his father run their family farm in his free time. He gave his life last December while serving as deputy sheriff at the Wyandotte County Sheriff's Office. Deputy Sheriff Matthew Eugene Yates served his community for 15 years at the Clark County Sheriff's Office as a member of their special operations team. His colleagues remember Deputy Yates for his joy, but also his strength and his bravery. He mentored younger deputies and children in their communities. Our thoughts are with his wife, his daughter, his stepsons, and his father, who also served in the Clark County Sheriff's Office, a long history of public service in that family. Police Officer Dominic M. Francis grew up in Bluffton, Ohio, a town in northwest Ohio, returned home to join the Bluffton Police Department after playing football at the University of Findlay and serving at the Findlay Police Department in the Hancock County Sheriff's Office. Officer Francis received the Officer of the Year Award twice, multiple letters of commendation, the Chief's Leadership Award, and a Bluffton Police Department Life-Saving Award. He was honored by Mothers Against Drunk Drivers as top cop and earned the Ohio EMS Star of Life multiple times. He loved spending time with his wife and 2 children at Indian Lake and served in law enforcement for 19 years. In honor of his memory, a portion of I-95 that runs near Bluffton has been renamed the Officer Dominic Francis Memorial Highway. Agent John Dale Stayrook was a dedicated husband, a father and grandfather, and devoted to the communities he served. He worked with the Medina County Drug Task Force in Northeast Ohio and the Medway Drug Enforcement Agency, serving for 19 years. He enjoyed woodworking and spending time in nature with his family and his friends. In February 2022, Agent Stayrook passed away after contracting COVID-19 in the line of duty. Deputy Sheriff Terrence Nicholas Bateman was a Cleveland native and, as difficult as this is, often a Cleveland sports fan who served with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office for 25 years. Deputy Sheriff Bateman was well respected and adored in his community. He supported his colleagues and always had a kind word to offer. He loved cooking for family and friends, his wife, his 5 daughters, 2 sons, and 2 brothers. We can't begin to repay the debt we owe these officers and all these families. We can work to protect more officers in the communities that they swear an oath to serve. It's why I'm working with colleagues of both parties on legislation to support law enforcement as they do their jobs. I'm joined by Arkansas Republican Senator Cotton to reintroduce our Protecting First Responders from Secondary Exposure Act to protect first responders when they encounter dangerous substances like fentanyl on the job, and introduce the Providing Officers with an Electronic Resources Act to help state and local law enforcement organizations secure high-tech portable screening devices to detect fentanyl, similar equipment and detection devices that our men and women serving us at the border have. Our law enforcement officers are on the front lines of the addiction crisis. They're dealing with ever more dangerous forms of fentanyl on the job. It's why I've worked with members of both parties on a plan to target the illicit fentanyl supply chain from the chemical suppliers in China to the cartels that transport the drugs in Mexico. I'm pleased the presiding officer today is someone who has great expertise at that, representing a state, New Mexico, in that part of the world. I'll keep fighting to make sure that police officers can retire with dignity. My bipartisan Social Security Fairness Act will ensure that Social Security benefits will be there when officers retire from a life of dedicated service as officers that pay into the state retirement system, but also have paid into Social Security. I'll work to ensure that first responders have the support they need to cope with the stresses of responding to crisis situations. This Police Week, let's offer law enforcement officials and public servants more than empty words. Let's honor the memory of these women and men who laid down the lives in service of their communities by getting their fellow officers the tools and training they need to do their jobs and to build trust with the communities they're sworn to protect. I yield the floor. That I have permission to complete my remarks before the roll call.
Without objection.
And thank you, Mr. President. I will not go long before the roll call because I know how this place works, so thank you. Yesterday, Mr. President, we celebrated Labor Day, a day when Americans come together to honor all the people who make this country work. I know the presiding officer from the junior senator from Massachusetts is one of the strongest supporters, not just of Labor Day, but the labor movement behind Labor Day. Whether you punch a clock, swipe a badge, earn a salary, or make tips, whether you're caring for children or an aging parent, all work has dignity. For too many Americans, we know hard work simply hasn't paid off the way that it should. We're working to change that. We're making real progress. We're taking historic steps to put workers first, to invest in American workers, and to make our economy work for every American, not just CEOs, not just Wall Street. Just last week, the Department of Labor proposed a new rule to make millions of workers eligible for overtime pay. We've been working on this for years because if you put in extra hours, you should be paid for those extra hours. It will put money in Ohioans' pockets. More than 100,000 Ohio workers will finally receive the overtime pay when they put in overtime work. Imagine that they haven't, but they haven't, the way this Congress and former presidents have let this happen. Long time coming, the fight's not over. We need to pass my Restoring Overtime Pay Act to provide workers financial security by ensuring that overtime pay is permanently protected regardless of who is in the White House. The important step forward comes after we pass the most pro-worker infrastructure bill in history with the strongest Buy America provisions in history. Means more opportunities for workers in the trades all over Ohio, repairing roads, laying broadband cable, replacing lead pipes, building bridges, fixing water systems, more work for American factories making the goods used to build our infrastructure. We passed the CHIPS Act to bring our supply chains home, ensure the technology of the future is made in America. It provides Davis-Bacon protection. That means they get union wages and union benefits for the workers creating these state-of-the-art factories like the one in Licking County, Ohio, just east of Columbus. We passed the Inflation Reduction Act with prevailing wage and strong Buy America rules. These are big wins for workers, the biggest wins and the most frequent wins for workers we've seen in a generation. The biggest steps we've taken in decades to create an industrial policy that puts our most valuable resources, American workers, first. Companies that recognize it's their workers who drive their success are the ones that will lead their industries into the future. Whether it's Licking County, where Intel entered a project labor agreement with the trades, something we insisted on in this body, or outside of Toledo in Fulton County, where Arch Solar is building a solar farm with union workers, or in the Mahoning Valley, where Altium just agreed, and I was there a few days ago, to raise wages by 25% after we pushed them to engage in the workers' union. I was in Lordstown talking with those workers at UAW Local 1112. There's a lot of history in that building, Mr. President. The pictures and the signs on the wall tell the story of the Ohio auto industry, the decades that workers spent building this industry, building the middle class in the Mahoning Valley. They tell the story of politicians who sold out Ohio workers to corporations that wanted cheap labor. You see the last Chevy Cruze sign on the wall as a reminder of what trade agreements did to places like the Mahoning Valley or my home in Mansfield, Ohio. But workers are resilient. Many of the workers I talked with last week worked at the old Chevy Cruze plant. Now they're making the batteries that will power the next generation of cars and trucks. They're ready to lead the auto industry in the future. They just need fair pay and a safe workplace and protections on the job. Altium needs, this is the GM Korea company, formed into a company called Altium. They need to agree to a fair permanent union contract that will be the gold standard and template for all EV contracts. That means honoring the UAW master agreement. A union card means higher pay, it means better benefits, it means greater retirement security, it means safer workplaces, it means more control over your schedule. It means a middle-class life. My wife, at the age of 16, growing up in the far northeast corner of Ohio in Ashtabula, at the age of 16, she had an asthma attack. Her dad's union card allowed her to have an ambulance take her to the Cleveland Clinic for 2 weeks, about an hour drive. Without that union card, she probably would have died. He was a utility worker, had carried that union card for 35 years. We shouldn't have to settle for less. We lay down a new marker. The jobs of the future should be good-paying union jobs. Jobs where you build a life and a career and see a future. For too long, we haven't had enough of those opportunities. Last week, I joined the Building Futures in Columbus for the graduation of their 7th class. Nothing quite like it. They're making more training programs, more apprenticeships, more opportunities to get people of all ages involved in the trades. Most were Columbus City School graduates. Few of them had union members in their families. Few of them had the kind of opportunity that a union card brings. These pre-apprentice programs means that upon their graduation from this pre-apprentice program, they will be able to become a bricklayer or an insulator or a millwright or an electrician or a carpenter or a plumber or a pipe fitter or a laborer or an operating engineer. It means good paid, skilled union jobs are accessible to everyone that look like America. Of course, we know what workers are up against when they organize. Corporations unleash all their power to fight their own workers, too often illegally. That's why I will never stop fighting, as I know the presiding officer is, to pass the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. We honor the workers this week who built the country and the progress we've made. Mr. President, I wear in my lapel a depiction of a canary in a cage. The mine workers 100 years ago, 120 years ago, took a canary down to the mines. If the canary died, the mine worker got out of the mines. He didn't have a union in those days strong enough or a government that cared enough to protect him. He really was almost always a he on his own. And look what we've done since then. Look what this was given to me by a steel worker at Workers' Memorial Day, but look what we've done since then. We've passed child labor laws, we've passed collective bargaining laws, we've passed Social Security and Medicare and all the kinds of things that have made middle-class workers, given them the opportunity we should have as a country. This week, we honor and celebrate that proud tradition. We recommit to fighting for the dignity of work, whether it's the PRO Act, whether it's the passing the Railway Safety Act, whether it's standing with workers on the picket lines. When work has dignity, every American's paid the living wage they've earned. Just this week, a group of us took on, if you will, in a labor dispute. Workers were about to strike. Workers were on the picket line. Hospital workers, mostly low-paid workers, not offered much from their employer, their big Cleveland hospital. They came to an agreement in part because of public pressure, in part because there's a strong organized union, organized labor at the bargaining table. When workers have dignity, workers have retirement security and paid leave and power over their schedules and their lives. When you love this country, you fight for the people who make it work That's what Labor Day is about. That's what organized labor is all about. Mr. President, I ask for the following remarks to be put a separate place in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to join me in confirming Philip Jefferson as Vice Chair of the Federal Reserve, Lisa Cook and Adriana Kugler to be Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. The Senate will be voting on Dr. Cook and Dr. Kugler's nomination in the next few days. These three nominees are talented economists, dedicated public servants. They're historic nominees who will bring diverse perspectives to the Fed. If confirmed, our Board of Governors will better reflect the country and the people who make it work. Our economy works better when we have people from diverse backgrounds, people who bring new ideas and different perspectives, not just the same old Wall Street corporate consensus. Dr. Philip Jefferson is a respected economist whose nomination for vice chair came out of our committee, the committee I chair, Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, with unanimous support. When he was first confirmed last year, he had wide bipartisan support in the Senate. Dr. Jefferson brings to the Fed outstanding academic credentials, years of strong leadership experience. He's a renowned scholar. He's a leading expert in monetary policy and the economics of poverty. Dr. Jefferson possesses a strong understanding of how higher prices hurt the most economically insecure Americans, and that access to good-paying jobs is the best antidote to poverty. He'll be the second black man to serve as vice chair in the Board of Governors. Dr. Lisa Cook is a well-qualified economist who has served with distinction since filling a vacancy last year in the Board of Governors. She brings a breadth of research, international experience in monetary policy, banking, and financial crises. Dr. Cook's experience in international economics has immense value as we continue in our economic recovery amidst global inflation. Prior to joining global inflation that's higher in most of the rest of the world than it is here. Prior to joining the Fed, Dr. Cook taught economics and international relations at the Kennedy School of Government and Michigan State University. During the Obama administration, she served in the Council of Economic Advisors as a senior economist and at the Treasury Department under the administrations of both Presidents Bush and Obama. She grew up in the South. She worked in the industrial Midwest, a state just north of mine, Michigan. She understands the vital role that workers and local communities play in building a strong economy. I have faith in her judgment to set monetary policy that grows our economy from the middle out and the bottom up. Last year, her character was attacked. Her credentials were questioned. It was an underhanded, unfair attack on an eminently qualified woman of color. She's overwhelmingly proved her naysayers wrong. She's brought a level-headedness and data-driven focus to monetary policy making. I would like to take a moment to thank Senator Rounds of South Dakota for his open-mindedness and support of her confirmation. He listened to her answers, he looked at her record, and he enthusiastically supported her. I wish all my colleagues would do that. She'd be the first black woman confirmed to a full 14-year term on the Federal Reserve Board. First in over 100 years. It was started in 1913, never been an African-American woman that's been reconfirmed. She will be the first. Last, Mr. President, Dr. Adriana Kugler is one of the nation's labor economists, top labor economist with an impressive record of both government and academic service. She's unquestionably qualified. She possesses bipartisan support from top economists and civil rights organizations. She serves as the executive director of the World Bank. She was confirmed via unanimous vote in the U.S. Senate for that job. She's played a critical role in the global economic recovery. Prior to serving at the World Bank, she was an economist at the Department of Labor and taught economics and public policy at Georgetown. First-generation American, the daughter of Colombian immigrants, Dr. Kugler has first-hand knowledge of runaway prices and limited employment opportunities. During her nomination hearing testimony, she shared how witnessing adversity and poverty in the country she was born in deepened her understanding of the need for fighting inflation and promoting full employment. She'll be the first Hispanic American to serve in the Board of Governors, again, in the history of the Federal Reserve beginning in 1913. Her confirmation will be a critical step forward in bringing more diverse perspectives to our nation's central bank, not just diversity in the way these nominees look, but diversity in the way they think, something we've simply not seen much of in the kind of elitist institutions in these kind of elitist institutions like the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. I strongly urge my colleagues to join me in supporting Dr. Jefferson, Dr. Cook, Dr. Kluber's nomination. All have bipartisan support, so we have all 7 seats in the Board of Governors filled with qualified experts helping in our economic recovery. I spoke to Chair Jerome Powell today about this and some other things. We discussed how important it is that the Fed that we have all 7 spots in the Federal Reserve confirmed. It's been a long time since we've done that. This week is our opportunity. I ask my colleagues to move forward in these nominations, and I yield the floor.
Beautiful.
President, thank you. Right after workers for Stellantis, known as the old name Stellantis, was Chrysler, Daimler Chrysler plant in Toledo. They make the Jeep Cherokee, union-made workers in Toledo, Ohio, my state. My wife and I each drive Jeep Cherokees. One of those cars once saved my life when a young high school kid at 40 miles an hour in the middle of the day ran a stop sign and hit the side of the car where I was sitting. Essentially no injury because these are well-made American cars by union labor. I went to the picket line Friday morning, talked with a lot of workers, and I know many of them. There are 6,000 at this plant, 1,100 of these workers at this Chrysler plant, this Stellantis plant in Toledo. 1,100 of these workers at the Jeep plant are on what's called a tiered wage system, where they make fewer than $19 and something an hour. They've been at Jeep at this plant, some of them 1 year, some of them 3 years, some of them 5 or 6 years, yet they make less than $40,000 a year as union workers. The reason for that, Mr. President, is some years ago when Chrysler and GM were in real serious economic trouble, the government helped, but the union, in order to save these plants, in order to save essentially the American automobile industry, they did major givebacks of their wages and their benefits. So they set up, management insisted, and the workers went along because they wanted to save these companies, took major pay cuts, set up a tiered wage system. So new workers, hundreds and hundreds, over 1,000 at this plant of 6,000 union workers, were making substandard wages. You know, that's troubling enough that those workers years later still are making those substandard wages. In some cases, you can't support a family on these wages. Yet, that's when Chrysler and GM were in such economic trouble. Since then, we know how well Chrysler, Stellantis now, and GM are doing. We know how well they're doing by a number of measurements. Number one, Stellantis, I always think of them as Chrysler or Jeep in my state. Stellantis made $12 billion just in this calendar year alone. This company made $12 billion. So when they were in trouble, the workers, by giving up a lot, making sacrifices, saved them. But now that these companies are so profitable, $12 billion just this year alone, Stellantis, they've essentially given nothing back to the workers, and they're unwilling to provide the workers a decent benefits, wages, all of those things. Now, at the same time, I met an entry-level worker there. She just started. She makes, the CEO of Stellantis makes 850 times what this worker makes. 850 times what this worker makes. The CEO of Stellantis makes 365 times what the average worker at Chrysler, the average worker at Stellantis makes in that plant and other plants around the country. So the fact is, these workers, clearly we come down on the side of these workers. The industry has done very well because of America's economic system. The industry's done very well because they've had the opportunity to do well in this country because the workers sacrifice so much. And that's why I will go back to the picket line. There may be picket lines and shutdowns and strikes in other part of the auto industry. The public clearly sides with these workers. The public understands that these CEOs making between 22 and 29 million a year, the 3 CEOs, gotten 30, 40% increases since the industry did so well. Again, a decade ago, workers were willing to give up a lot to keep these companies going. Now they are immensely profitable, $12 billion profits just this year alone. CEO making $22, $23 million. auto industry is simply not willing to come to the table and negotiate in good faith so these workers can share in the prosperity they created. And we know it not only hurts those workers when they're only making $16 an hour, it hurts the community. It hurts Toledo. It hurts Lucas County. It hurts Wood County, those communities that don't have the taxes they would if these workers were making decent wages, and don't have the economic prosperity they would if these workers were making decent wages in buying, spending a little more at the grocery store, on movies, on clothes, on all the things that help to create a prosperous economy. So no question, I'll continue to stand with workers. I think most of the Senate stands with workers. I know most of the American people stand with these workers. I implore GM and Chrysler, GM and Stellantis and Ford to come to the table, make a good faith, decent offer, and get these workers back to work. They don't want to strike. Their backs were to the wall. They had to strike. I yield the floor.